Welcome everybody to Am I Safe? I'm up here to introduce our speaker. His name is Tim Huff. I met Tim Huff about 20 years ago. We were at a restaurant called Jack Astor's. He was drawing on a, you know how at some restaurants you can just draw on the tablecloth? He was drawing on the tablecloth. It was really cool. I actually kept the picture that he drew, and it's probably in one of my journals somewhere at home. I'm just going to read a little bit about Tim Huff. After over 30 years of full-time social justice work across Canada, predominantly focused on binding up the brokenhearted and serving young people pressed to the margins of society, with his name on 7 award-winning books for adults, youth, and children, and having received numerous awards, a simple Tim Huff bio is no longer easy to process. For serving as the founder of the creative lead for Youth Unlimited Toronto's Compassion Series program, Tim's current bio is humble and succinct. Advocate, ally, artist, author, doer, speaker, peacemaker. I'd like you to all welcome Tim Huff up to the front.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. I'm just going to pray real quick. Father God, thank you so much for this time together. I just pray that you would open our eyes, that you would open our ears and let us see. And I pray that you would help us bring hope to each youth that hears this and that we're able to use this with. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you. All right, so for those of you who are at home watching this either live streamed right now through our cameras, or if you're watching this at a later date, we'll just give you a picture of what's going on here. In 2020, we've had to figure out a whole different way to do all kinds of things. Usually when I come to speak to a place, this venue holds several hundreds of people, and the goal would be to fill it. And now we have some children that are spaced apart, just as they should be, all in masks. And we have some adults here and some more coming later staying spaced apart. But we know we have people sitting in their living rooms, in their kitchens, they're on their laptops, some people might be on their phones, and we're all getting used to the new normal, but I hope we don't have to ever get really used to this new normal, that this is just the season we're in. So it functions a little bit different. When you're here live, it feels a little bit awkward to be sitting far apart from each other with masks on and everything, doesn't it? So we're just going to make the most of it. I'm the lucky one. I'm standing up here, and I don't have to wear a mask. I'm the one person in the room not wearing one, so there we go. What we're going to do is, we're going to do a small session now where we're going to actually, with the young people here with us, where we're going to actually read through this book called Am I Safe? And then we're going to do a couple of things together, just from right where you are, so no one needs to worry that you have to go anywhere. And you at home, we'd like you to kind of focus in on this, and then when we do a couple of things at the end, we want you to do those with us as well. I'm just going to move this over here a bit. And then we're going to take a break, and the kids that are here are going to go do an activity, and then we're going to do a session just for the adults, where we kind of get a little more specific about how to process the discussion with the children. And what you may be interested in, if you're watching this and you say, well, I care about children, but I'm just dialing in because I'm friends with the venue or Johanna or a YFC that's putting us on, I want you to know that everything we're going to talk about in the next short while, with the kids with us and then on our own, is for you as well. So all the premises, all the ideas, all the discussions, they are put in. For example, this book is designed for elementary to young junior high age in its writing and its content, writing style. And the illustrations, you can see, are meant to be kid-friendly. But all the premises and all the learning pieces are as much about you. So if you are an adult that is feeling you have some fear and anxiety, things that you are going through, perhaps just in this year, or perhaps all the way back to your own childhood. This is also meant for you in the room and for you at home. So hopefully you can stay with us and watch through some of this. When we came to this book, we drew it. I drew the book, and my friend Iona, who works for YFC out in British Columbia, we decided to work on this book and write it together, Iona and I. And then I used to be a in the animation course, and I used to illustrate for a living when I was a teenager. And so I've illustrated all my kids' books myself. Now, when I did it in 2017, of course, I wouldn't have thought to put masks on all these characters. If I was to do it now, it would look a little bit different, wouldn't it? There'd be masks, and probably these people wouldn't be bunched so together, not if it was correct for this season in our lives. So we're going to work around the idea that some of the visuals are applied to what we'd call normal time. The premises are all the same, but when you see some of the illustrations, you go, well, kids can't be in a playground like that together right now and that close and everything else like that. We understand that. So we want to talk through the book, but before we do, I find this is a really helpful thing to start, to get us moving, and for young people, to get us thinking. So I'm going to get you all to try. You can do where you are. I, when I was a teenager, met someone whose parents were both deaf. So she was a hearing teenager, and I was a hearing teenager, but both of her parents were deaf, and she was what is known as a CODA. I don't know if any of you have ever heard what a CODA is. CODA, C-O-D-A, stands for Child of Deaf Adults. Both her parents were deaf, but she was hearing. It was not genetic. So like they were deaf for different reasons than she was hearing. So sign language was her first language. I was working at a camp for deaf children at the time that I just was interested in joining in. Anyway, I ended up marrying her, and we've been married for 33 years. And we have grown kids, and now I'm a grandpa. I have a little baby grandchild. He's about 10 months old. Anyway, sign language was my wife's first language. Before she could speak, it was signing. And of course, I became fluent in sign through working at the camp and then being in her life and with her dad, who is deaf and everything. So I'm going to teach you just a couple of signs that are interesting to know and are fun to remember, but they kind of all apply to what we're going to discuss tonight. So here they are. You can do them with me. Adults too, and people at home, please you too. So we're going to do a sign for help. So we do this. Put your hand out and your thumb up. So imagine this is a person. Imagine this is you or a friend or someone, and you need a little bit of help. Then take your other hand and you lift it. That's a sign for help. So when we were at the deaf camp and some of our young people needed some help with something, they would wave over and they would ask for help. So you can remember that at home when you're sitting at the kitchen table or something. You can, if everything's too noisy, you just want some help, you can teach that sign at home. So that's one sign, help. The other one is safe. This is called Am I Safe? So safe is a really interesting one because visually you'll understand it when you see it. It's something like covering yourself to feel safe. So put your hands like this. They're crossed and they're open. And as you pull them apart, you close your fingers so they're fists. So it's like this. Safe. So that's when you feel safe. That's when you want to feel safe. And you can imagine that that's like putting something protective on. Safe. Okay, we're going to give you a third sign. You ready? A third sign is courage. It's a little bit like safe, but you're going to feel, and you can see how it's expressive. Like when you say, I want to feel safe, like you can actually feel how you would do that in a conversation. For courage, you're going to have your open hands here, kind of at your shoulders, in front of your shoulders, and you're going to pull them out into fists, and you're going to courage. And you can say, oh, I wish I had more courage. And you can do it strong, you can feel it. And it's almost like a superhero move, right? Courage. And then we have one, calm. And this is what most of the parents would want to know, this sign, because you can use it in your home. You would want something to be calm. So you might start, you could do it with like this and then do it, but most folks just do it with their hands up here like this and like that. And the more you are trying to express calm, probably the slower and wider you would move your hands. Calm. I just want things to be calm. Right? And then the last sign is perhaps the best one. And when I teach, when I go into schools and I work with educators, they like this sign the best because they feel like they can use it in the class when they're noisy and stuff, and kids can respond without answering. It's a sign for understand, meaning do you understand? And so you're going to take your fist and you're going to put it up at your head, this side in and your knuckles out. And then when you understand, your pointer finger, make sure you use the right finger now, your pointer finger comes up. So it's down, it's down, it's down. And what you would do in class is if you were a teacher, you could say, do you understand? And then you could actually tell the kids, when you understand, let me know. Understand. So there are 5 signs. Do you remember them? I'll go through the first one. Help. Who remembers help? Good for you. Help. Help. And then I think our second one was safe. Anyone remember safe? Good for you. Safe. You want to cover yourself safe. Next one was a little bit similar, was our superhero one, courage. Courage. And then calm. Right? And the last one, understand. Understand. Okay, so tonight we're hoping that we can create a lot of understanding and we can do things here tonight that you can understand. The book is called Am I Safe? And hopefully you can see it at home okay. I will tell you that you can get this online. You can contact YFC here. They would tell you how. There is a digital copy on my Compassion Series website that if you don't want to spend the money, if you just want to have a look at it, if you want to use it right now and don't want to wait to order it or something like that, if you go to compassionseries.com/amisafe, you can see a digital copy where everything we have you can look at right now or whenever you choose. Let's start the book. Hopefully you can see well. I might move it around a little bit for you. Am I safe? Am I okay? Something's very wrong today. This picture, if that person looks a little bit similar, he's a little bit scruffy, got long hair and a baseball hat, that's because that's me. I drew that of my family. Back in when 9/11 happened, lots of years ago, my kids, my daughter was 8 and my son was 4. And my kids were watching not the scary stuff we were watching on TV that was making my wife Diane and I nervous, but they were watching us. And they got frightened, not because of what they saw, but because they saw Mommy and Daddy getting frightened. And this year, that's really relevant. That might be relevant at all different stages, but that's really part of what's going on this year. Sometimes it feels like my fear list is long, with so many things in the world going wrong. But fears are something everyone has. Our teachers, our friends, our moms, and our dads. Have you ever thought about what your fear list is? So this little boy's name is Eli, and maybe you have some fears like him. So we're looking at the different fears he has. He's kind of afraid of bullies. That's on his fear list. And up here, it's kind of a military picture, like an army, war picture. I won't say army, of course. Afraid of wars and images of war you might see and don't understand. This one just represents the whole world seeing like it's crazy and there's cracks in it and everything. And a lot of grown-ups might say, you know what, this looks a little bit like the way the world looks to me right now. Over here we have fires. Do you know that it's one of the top fears of children is a house fire, that they will be stuck in a house fire. Sometimes as adults we forget that. And over here, my goodness, I drew this 3 years ago, but I'm not sure I could have drawn anything more relevant for now. It's a bunch of adults who are angry, who are just angry, and in this they're kind of either protesting or everything else. And I'm not saying whether that's right or wrong. What I'm saying is when you're a young person and you just see a lot of angry adults, no matter what they're angry about, it can make you fearful. So think about what your fear list is. You might think of 4 or 5 things you say, if I was to write out a fear list, things that actually make me feel nervous or anxious, what is that? And if you're brave enough to share it with your parents, that's an important thing to do. And parents, if you then make your own fear list, and you're brave enough to share it with your kids, you need to know, it's been proven, that doesn't make your child more afraid. What it does, it opens up the dialogue that says, we can share that. We all get afraid, and then we learn how to cope with things together. Here's our next picture. For some people, fears will pop up, then go. For some, fears get stuck and then start to grow. So what we did here is I drew a jack-in-the-box, and he's jumping out and going, boo. And you can see our little boy here, he was walking along, and he was startled. That fear just popped up on him. He wasn't expecting it. But then if we look at the same little boy here, he's trying to close the top of that jack-in-the-box, but the fear's not going away. In fact, look at it's getting bigger. And sometimes that's how things are. Some of the fears, they pop up and they scare us. But sometimes we think about them and get more worried about them, and they build up, and that fear becomes larger and larger. So there are 2 different ways we get fearful. Now we have 4 children that we're just discussing real quick here. And it kind of represents 4 different types of fears. For Katie, you can see Katie here. Now Katie in this picture, she's a young girl that's in a wheelchair. For Katie, the fears come from uncertain thoughts, like wondering if she will be laughed at or not. And you can see she's imagining what it's like if she thinks the kids might be laughing at her, or teasing her, or making fun of her. For Ella, now here's our little girl Ella. For Ella, the fears come from what she has seen. Like when kids or adults are angry or mean. You can see here's an adult, maybe it's a school teacher or a principal or an adult somewhere who's angry, and that gets her fearful. You know, when I was a little boy in school, I never got in trouble with the school principal, and very few times with my actual teachers. But when I saw them get angry at the kids, it made me afraid, even though they weren't angry with me. So here's our boy, his name is Jazz. For Jazz, fears come from what is not seen, like what ifs, or oh no's, that stick like bad dreams, and what ifs. Right now, we live in a time where there's a lot of what ifs. What if this happens? What if that happens? What if all of a sudden we're not allowed to do that? I remember for all of you when all of a sudden school was closed for 2 weeks back in March, and you were like, what if they don't open it up in January or in April? And then you were like, what if they don't through the summer? And what if camp closes? And what if we can't go on our vacation? And what if, and for your moms and dads and grandmas and grandpas, you're feeling it all the what ifs. In this picture, when I drew it, this what if was, it's after school, he's sitting on the school steps, and it's 4:30. And mom or dad was supposed to pick him up, and they haven't come yet. And so his mind starts thinking, what if? And what does he imagine? Something bad. He imagines a car accident. What if they didn't come because they were in a car accident? And down here, see this little boy stomping his foot and his mom is watching? For Lucas, the fears keep wrapped up inside and burst out his anger with nowhere to hide. When I was a dad and my daughter and son were young, sometimes my daughter would get angry and I misunderstood it, and sometimes it was her expressing other things. Her emotions were just so ramped up, and I thought it was her just being naughty or whichever. And for some of us adults, we have to know that sometimes anger is an expression of fear and anxiety. We have to process when that is so and when it isn't, but we have to be mindful that that is a possibility. I wish I would have known that all those years ago. Perhaps this looks like some of you at night. When fear comes to visit, its manners are poor. It barges right in and kicks down the door. Our stomachs get tight and our hearts start to race. We can't fall asleep or feel safe anyplace. Do any of you look like that at night sometimes, do you think? Where your eyes are wide awake, you have the pillow over your head, and you just can't sleep. I don't think I've ever remember a year when I've heard more grown-ups say that that's how they felt. Have any of you guys felt that? Like it's hard to get to sleep at night? Yeah, I can see it. Okay. When fear doesn't leave and decides it will stay, it acts like a bully, scaring good things away. We call this anxiety. It fills up our heads. It spins thoughts around, causing worry and dread. So we had decided that for this part, I would draw an anxiety monster. What if anxiety, which means a bunch of fears that have gotten really big and are controlling us, what if that was a monster? And this is how I decided to draw an anxiety monster, especially if he's a bully. He's got boxing gloves on, and he looks kind of scary, and I thought he shouldn't have a mouth. If you were to draw an anxiety monster, what color would you draw him? Anyone? There's no right or wrong answer. What would you draw if you were to draw an anxiety monster? Because maybe when you go here and you're doing your coloring, you can draw, yeah. Red? Why would you draw him red? It's a color that you feels like would represent fear and anxiety, a red color. That would be a very, very creative and smart. Yes? Green? Why green? Oh, you think of him as a slime, so he thinks of anxiety as a slimy monster, and green would be the perfect color to draw a slimy monster. That's a great answer. And you had one? Like orange? Yeah, how come orange? Orange might be a fear color because it's bright and right at you, right? Good answers. So think about that. And even you, all of you, if you were to draw your own fear monster, what would it look like? There's something about naming fear and anxiety and then putting a little visual to it, because then eventually we might be able to visualize it, and then maybe we can visualize that thing going away or getting beaten or getting conquered. So when we did this, the first part were those introductions, and the second little part, because the book's not very long, the front part is this part for you to read with your families or on your own, and the back part is a whole section for adults, teaching them. So this is still the front section. We went with this boy, and it says, meet Eli. So this is Eli. You saw him before when he had the fear list. Now, I told you that I co-wrote this book with a friend named Iona. Well, her son's name is Eli. And he kind of looked like this when he's young. Now, he's in his 20s now. He's a young man. But he let us tell a bit of his story in the book from when he was about 8, 9, 10 years old. So this is what Eli looked like. It says, meet Eli. And now we hear his voice talking. And he says, for me, I feel helpless, alone in my fear. I'm sure something's wrong is the whisper I hear. And sometimes we don't even know what's wrong, but we're just like, I feel like something's wrong. And we get this feeling, and that's when anxiety comes up. And some people around us don't understand because they're just going about things, and you have this sense that something's wrong. And Eli had that. Okay, a lot of kids find this and the anxiety monster the two most interesting drawings. This is the fear monster, the fear giant that I drew. And you said green, so this guy's blue. He was blue to me, but he had lots of green clothes on too. And just says fear all over him. And it says, the things that I want to do now I just can't. The fears are a giant, and I'm like an ant. If you look really closely, I know it'd be hard for you guys to see on the TV or watching at home, but hopefully you guys can see it here. Look down here in the corner. There's little tiny Eli. I wish you could be closer. I wish protocol had you kids sitting right up close, but little Eli is down here. He's only like this big. And it's just how he feels when he looks at all his fear. It looks so enormous and terrifying, and he feels so little. Have any of you ever had that, where you're so afraid that you feel little and your fear feels really big? Yeah, I can see lots of nodding. Have any of you grown-ups had that? Mm-hmm. But wait. You can see we put wait in big capital letters. But wait, I'm still me, even though I feel small. I'm strong and I'm brave and I'm anxious. That's all. There are things I can think and things I can say. I'll find what I can do and do it today. Now, you might remember our anxiety monster, was here, right? Well, look at, now our anxiety monster is laying flat, and Eli is standing on him. He's conquering him. He's like a superhero. He's been able to take over the anxiety monster. And even looks a little bit like a superhero. He sure looks happier than when we saw him before when he looked anxious, didn't he? Because sometimes we just have to do little things to make us feel like, okay, I can move ahead. Have any of you ever had that in school where you've been anxious to do something, maybe in front of the class? And then when you actually just did a little bit of it, you felt a little bit braver, a little bit more courageous. Any of you ever had to yeah, you did? What happened?
I was given a speech in front of my class last year and wasn't knowing how it was going to go. So, like you said, I'm a bit scared. Get up there. I know I wanted to do this is to improve my public speaking. So,
Good for you.
up there, gave a little bit.
And did it go well?
And then went on. It wasn't so bad.
So he said he had to give a speech last year, and what he knew is, I know it was hard for you to hear, he's got a mask on and I've got the mic on, and he knew that he wanted to do it, and he needed to do it, and he wanted to do it, but he got up the courage to do it, and once he did it, it actually went pretty well. He had to get some courage to do it. Good for you. Yeah?
It's like when you're excited but you're nervous at the same time. It's
Oh.
feels like.
Sometimes we can be excited and nervous at the same time. That is for sure. That's very insightful. Wow. You kids are really, really smart and really excellent at sharing. Here we go. We're nearing the end of the book. The first thing I'll do is to name what I feel. Remember we said that? We will say it. We'll say it. Okay, I feel afraid or I feel anxious. I will actually say it. You don't have to say it to public. You might just say it to yourself. You might say it to a close friend, or in particular, you might say it to a family member that you can trust really well. You say, I'm actually fearful. And a good way forward is when we kind of name things like that. Then I'll look past the what ifs and see, remember up here, the big words, what if? I'll look past the what ifs and see what is real. I'll start to talk back to the bully inside. I'll breathe deep and remember, I've no need to hide. So I'm going to take this one and I'm going to set it aside because we're going to talk about that in 1 minute. And here we get near the end. If you notice I'm anxious, please choose to come near. If I seem kind of frozen, just know it's the fear. Now remember, this is back in normal times. Kids didn't have to be socially distanced. We will be there again soon. And they didn't have to wear masks. So if this was how you remember recess or in the playground before, you can see our little boy Eli is sitting off to the side. He's way over here. And you can see all the kids from all different shapes and sizes of kids, and they're all playing and doing different things, and they're having fun and active. And Eli's over here on his own because somehow that crowd and that group of kids all being busy and doing things actually is fearful or anxious for him. But look what happens. One of his buddies comes over and just sits with him. And it's just kind, and he's not trying to talk him into things or anything like that. He's just being at his side. The battle is real, so it's like a battle when people have lots of fear. Yeah, a little bit of fear, a lot of fear, and the battle feels for real. The battle is real, but my weapons are strong. Be kind, stand close by, and help me belong. And you can see, here's Eli walking away, and he's smiling, and his buddy is just with him. Has just been kind and thoughtful and understands. And look what they're walking away from. There's our jack-in-the-box that popped out to scare him. There's our anxiety monster, and look at his boxing gloves have fallen off. And this big boot is from our fear giant. And they're just walking away from that. So that's the story in it. Now for our parents here, our grown-ups, caregivers, teachers, grandparents, please know you can find this book, and in the back portion, what we're going to do after the break in a couple of minutes is we're going to discuss some of the stuff that's in the guide for the parents to help process this with their kids and in their own lives. But before we do that, we're going to do, this one is the one I put aside, the what ifs. What ifs are hard. Then I'll look past the what ifs and see what is real. And so we're going to try just one thing. There's something that's called grounding. Have any of you ever heard of grounding? It's kind of a strange term. Some of you have. So grounding means sometimes we have all these things going on in our heads. And they're getting us all scared and nervous and anxious. And the whole world, the whole broken world and all the dilemma in the world feels like it's going on in here. That's what it all feels like. And do you know how big your brain is? Do this. You put this fist up, put it together. That's the size of your brain. Whatever age you are, you can look down there, and all of that fear and everything else that's going on, it's happening in this size inside of your head. That's where it's all happening. But sometimes we need to be reminded that there's a whole world out there that's not everything that's going on in our head. And there's something called grounding that helps us to calm down. And it might seem real simple, but it works. So what we're going to do is the big five, and it's this simple. Big five is this. We start with saying, name, and you can just do it right where you are. You can do it at home. You guys do it here. Name 5 things that I see. So you can just say it to yourself. You can say it out loud. You can say it in your head. 5 things I can see. And I'll try to look right around so everything's not right in front of you. 5 things I see. So what do I see? I see way up there a big exit sign. And over here, I see a big screen. And back there, I see some sound guys and some tech guys that are making all this happen. So you name 5 things you can see. All of a sudden, you're starting to come out of your head and you're saying, wait, there's a whole world. And those things I just named, they don't seem too crazy. Like everybody seems, it actually reminds me that, oh, those are calm, normal things. So the next part of the big 5 is 4 things I can touch. And then if you're doing this at home, if you're doing this even just where you're sitting, try to pick 4 things that maybe have different textures to them. So I go 4 things I can touch. I can touch this stand. Okay, that feels metallic. And I could touch the carpet. Okay, that feels like something different. I touch glass on my glasses. That feels something different. All of a sudden now, we're reminded as we touch these things, okay, more normal, good, tactile things in the world. We go down to 3. 3 things I can hear. Sometimes this is tricky when you're in silence, but if we all be really quiet, you would say you could hear my voice, but if we listen really quiet, I can hear some fans in the room. I just heard someone kick their chair. So you listen, you go like, oh yeah, there's more there. 2 things I can smell. This one is sometimes harder, and we're hoping the answers are always good. So maybe you smell dinner when you're at home, or something else, the shampoo, your shampoo, whatever. 2 things. And then the last one is, and what's one thing I know? One thing I know. Now, I change that. One thing I know could be anything, but I say, what's one good thing I know? Do that as part of your grounding. And some of you might say, I know that my mom loves me. Or I know that I have a great school teacher. Or I know I can't wait to go to my swimming lesson. Whatever it is. And so we do the big 5. They're in the back of the book. And we do the big 5. This is called grounding, and it brings us out. The last thing we're going to do, and then we're going to visit our signs, and we're going to call it a break, okay? The last thing we're going to do is called mountain breathing. Sometimes with our busy brains, what we need to do is get lots of oxygen in there to help clear the way. And we do something called mountain breathing. And an easy way to do it is we're going to make a mountain with our hands. So we get our pointer finger out. And we're going to start down here, and we're going to do a 4 count. So meaning 1, 2, 3, 4. We're usually counting it in our heads. We're going to go 4 up, and we're going to go 4 down. And we're going to breathe in through our mouth, in through our nose and out through our mouth. Hard to do with your masks on and make sure you're socially distanced and everything, but anyway, where you are, and we're going to do, you would do that 5 times. You would make 5 mountains. So let's try just a couple. Are you ready? Here we go. Counting to 4 in your head when you do it. That's how long, right? And again. And something about that breathing helps calm us down. And when you're in your home and families, if you're using this grounding exercise with your children, it really helps if you don't set them off and say, go do that. Stand and be at their side or with them and do it with them. And you breathe together. These are called grounding exercises. So they're part of taking all the stuff in our head and bringing us out into this part of the world. Okay, you guys have been great at home. Hopefully that's been helpful. We're going to revisit our signs one last time because it's always good to visit them at the front and you think you remember them, but if you can still remember them all this time later, they're probably going to stay with you pretty well. Okay, our first sign was help. Okay, I see lots of people remembered help in this room. Pretty much everyone has it. Help. Help. Our second sign was safe. Safe. Good. Wow, this crowd in this room, I hope you're doing well at home. This crowd in this room has got it down. Courage. We start here at our shoulders. And if you want to like really portray that you're courage, you would just go. And then we had calm. Calm. And if you wanted to make it really calm, you do it that way, nice and slow and wide. And our last one is understand. Understand. And it's always fun to do it like this. If you're a parent in a room and you want to say, do you understand? You just go like this and you wait till everyone goes, and if they don't do that, you can stop them and try to explain things until they go, now I understand. Great. Thank you, everyone. I think we're going to take a 10-minute break. Is that right? 10 is good. We're going to take a 10-minute break for you folks who are watching. So if you're going to run and get a drink or use the restroom, come back in 10 and we'll do something particularly for the adults. Thanks to you guys. You kids were great. I think they have something fun for you to go and do. Hi, folks. Sorry about that. We're back, and so our group is here. The adults are around the room a little bit. Some are up close now, so it's nice to see faces. Everyone here is masked except me, so I just want everyone at home or watching this to know that YFC here is taking care of all the protocols they need to make sure they get it right. So thank you, Johanna. I'm working from, it's interesting, the people in the room can see it, I'm working from a few cue cards. It's like I'm on the David Letterman show back in the old days, because I've watched so many people on Zoom or on screen use their little laptops and stuff like that. And if you are like me, you are getting screen weary of watching anything. And where people can't be at least a little bit animated, they are losing me left, right, and center. So anyway, I've gone to an old school way here. You hopefully can't see it on camera, so it'll look like I'm way smarter than I am, but I'm using some of my own prompts as we go. So we went through the book, Am I Safe? At the back portion of the book is the front end is the whole story part, but the back looks like this. And it's got all kinds of activities you can do with kids or in your home. It's got all kinds of FYIs and information and things perhaps you didn't know or want to discover. And again, as much as you will learn about the children in your life and what's going through with them and how you might actually process and talk with them about things, there's going to be so much in here that you are going to discover about yourself. And some of that will come out here, and about how to actually not just cope alongside the young people in your life and their fears, but your own fears. And certainly for those of you who are parents of teenagers, this is for you as well, of course. YFC predominantly works with teenagers. I did all of my life work with teenagers. I've been in YFC work for 33 years. And predominantly, just so you know where I'm coming from, I'm not a counselor, and I'm not a therapist, and I'm not a medical person. I run a program called the Compassion Series. You can find it on Facebook or Instagram. You can look at our website, compassionseries.com. But the first portion of my life, for 25 years, I worked with kids who were highly filled with anxiety and stress because I worked with homeless kids for over 2 decades. I've written a fair bit about it, have a few adult books out as well. And if you go to compassionseries.com, in our resource section, you can find books for kids and adults that we've created. But I worked with, you can imagine, our kids in Toronto on the streets. Their stresses and their fears are like lived out moment to moment, nevertheless all the agonies that they've carried in their heads through abuses they've fled and all kinds of things. So part of my knowing comes from that section. Then part of my knowing comes from the fact that I am a dad. My daughter's 27 and married with a baby, and my son is 23 and is working and has a lovely girlfriend. And so my kids are older now, but I was that dad. And now with the Compassion Series, I have this great burden again for the next generation, thinking, what kind of world is my little grandson, Jackson, going to live in? So what happened was I created something called the Compassion Series, and basically the Compassion Series is this discussion. I was working with teenagers for all that time, and I thought, I hate the idea that so many kids are waiting till they do social service hours in high school before they actually are entering in to a world of care. We've got to bring it back even younger. So the Compassion Series is all about getting into the hearts and minds of children as young as kindergarten, all the way through elementary ages, and teaching them to look through the entire world through the lens of compassion. That is the goal. That they would look at all what we would call social justice issues. For people in the Christian faith, they would see them as ministry issues, whichever. But that we would look through the lens of compassion. That we would teach our kids, because that's the kind of culture we want. And especially now, I'm sure most of you that have children in your life are saying, I'd give anything for my kids and the kids they're with to be looking through the world through the lens of compassion, because it's not feeling that way out there. So that's what we do with the Compassion Series. And you can find our books there. How do we talk to kids about homelessness? How do we talk to them about disabilities? There's one that I wrote with Cheryl Bear, a First Nations leader from the West Coast, about the beauty of Canada's Indigenous people. And then there's this one in our next book. I also have a Christmas book called Make Way for the Christmas Hush that might interest you, those of you that want a family book for your kids. And then we're working on a few other ones coming. So that's a bit of introduction. When we get back to this book, here's what I want to tell the grown-ups. This is where I want to start. Do any of you remember from college, maybe even high school, but college or university, did you ever study Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Do you remember? For some of us, it's been a while. In this room, lots of people are nodding. It's been a while since many of us reviewed this. But this is an important thing to remember and to think about. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where he explained that the focus is on the positive qualities in people, not to treat them like, and as he called them, a bag of symptoms. And what we had at the bottom, of course, was always the physiological needs: water, air, food, everything we need to kind of just keep moving forward, right? Then the second part of the pyramid here is safety and security. And we've always tended to think about that, many of us, like having a roof over our head and a place to sleep at night. And that's true, especially when I work with homeless kids. That is a true function of what needs to happen. Then we get to love and belonging, and to esteem issues and self-actualization, meaning when we can be all we want we can be, when we are rising above to be all the things we dreamt, or are at least working towards those goals and everything else. One of the things that happens for a lot of us when we're dealing with the young people in our lives is we know they have the food and the air and the water, all the physiological needs, and we get so stuck going, why is my child not more confident? Why are they not more creative? Why are they not going for it like other kids down the street and this and that? And what we forget is kids can never, any more than we can, leapfrog over safety and security. To expect them to have the basic needs in life and then all of a sudden tell us the other things, but if they don't feel not just safe and secure that they have a place to sleep and live, but I mean in their heads, if they don't feel safe and well, and some of us push, we should just get to this stage. Like maybe if you did this, you'd feel more confident, you'd feel better and creative, and they're still stuck here. And so we can't forget that this second tier is really important. And I know for me, when I was a dad, it was easy for me to think, well, I've given them enough safety and security. Why are they just not leapfrogging to love and belonging and to the other stages? So we might need to re-examine that part of it. The toolkit in the back of the book basically goes through 4 different things. We talk about unpacking fear, and we did a bit of that in the first session with the kids here. Unpacking fear. The next one goes from fear to anxiety. So some of us have fear, but then when that fear gets multiplied and deep-rooted, it becomes something different than fear. It becomes anxiety. And then the third section is we move from anxiety to courage. And you remember in the book, all of a sudden, he said, I'll do what I can do. I won't worry about what I can, I'll do what I can do. And something about courage came. And the fourth section is perhaps the one that that gets missed all the time, courage to compassion. We create courageous kids, but we need to also create compassionate kids. Sometimes, especially amongst siblings, this becomes a really important part of the picture. Well, I can go to soccer and play, and I have a whole bunch of friends, everything else, and then the other sibling is not that person. And one sibling may not have much compassion for the other sibling. They don't understand it. They're not going through that. They're rising above. They're doing all kinds of things. But there needs to be a compassionate nature to this discussion. Have you ever heard of mean world syndrome? There's something called mean world syndrome. I would say it's a little bit of a more critical discussion in 2020, what I'm about to read, but we wrote this but it is real. We just have to contextualize it because there's a lot for us to be thinking about. But mean world syndrome in general reads this. So this is you can see my teaching copy is a little different than the one you would buy. It's got all my notes, scribbles in it. The violent content of mass media, television, newspapers, print media, radio, and internet, convinces viewers that the world is more dangerous than it actually is. The viewer feels a desire for more protection than is warranted by the threat. Feelings of fear become predictors of danger instead of just feelings. It's easy for us to turn on the news, my goodness, especially right now, and to go, mean world syndrome, I've got it. It looks like everyone. Look, the first 15 minutes of your newscast looks terrifying. And it doesn't matter where they go in the world, you go, I think I'm getting mean world syndrome. And our kids get that sometimes from us. Remember the first picture that I showed of my wife and I during 9/11? And our kids were catching some mean world syndrome because if mommy and daddy are losing it, and they were worried about how we were handling things, not what was going on the TV. It makes the world seem really mean and scary when mommy and daddy are really afraid. And in 2020, we've spent a lot of time being afraid, and rightfully so. But we have to figure out what we're going to do with that. There are 5 tips to talk to your kids about scary world events. And I'm going to tell you what the 5 are. So we list them in the book, a little bit different than I'm about to say them here, but you can walk through that. We actually give some websites and some resources that you can look for more. One is, when you're talking to your kids, and you do need to talk to the kids in your life about these things, share only what is necessary. Now, that doesn't mean hold back. It means think through at a very young age. They're going to be less sophisticated than if you have kids in grade 6, 7, 8, high school. And start with this way. Ask them what they already know. And work from that place. Okay, I know this is going on. Suppose it's American elections or new rules about COVID or something that's happening in the high school or community. What do you already know? And start with that place. But don't you spring a whole bunch of stuff on them that they don't need to start with. And remember their age. Make it age appropriate. Number 2, let them know why they are safe. And you're saying, well, how do I do that? Well, the first place is this. Let them know what you consider your job is. And what your job is this. My job is 100% to keep you as safe as I can keep you. That's my full job and responsibility, and I take it more seriously than anything else in this world. And there's something of reminding them of why they're safe. Of places and moments and the things around them that are keeping them safe as they can be. Number 3, we talked a bit about this as well. Validate their feelings. This is sometimes hard. That we talked about peers. In my generation, I'm 56. So in my generation, that didn't always happen, validating people's feelings. It was kind of like, oh yeah, get on with it. Or even when I was a dad, I remember always worrying, well, am I just enabling their fears or enabling their concerns if I kind of coddle this discussion too much? So it's about how we talk about it. But the idea that we don't validate them and we just brush them away and go, yeah, you'll be okay. Everything about this, all the stats and all the background information on it says that causes more harm than good. We need to validate what they feel so we can start to cope with it. Meaning we need to say, I actually hear you and understand that you're feeling that way. Because maybe we don't understand it, but that first part is to validate that we respect that they're feeling something. Number 4, we're to be their safe place. And that's a little bit like the second one, but what it means is we need to remind the young people in our life that they can talk to us about anything. We are so safe that anything they want to bring up, they can talk to us about. And there's a real piece about that that means not causing shame or embarrassment. And you might think, well, my kids wouldn't be ashamed or embarrassed in front of their parents, but the older they get, the more that becomes a reality. How many of us have had teenage kids in our world or kids in junior high, and they're embarrassed to talk to us. They're embarrassed that mom and dad would think this or that, or grandma and grandpa, or they would see them at this weak place. They're supposed to be rising above like their friends or their peers. No embarrassment, no shame when you're the safe place. It's no different than who are the safe people in your life for you as an adult. They will for sure be the ones who don't cause you shame and embarrassment. And 5, Mr. Rogers was well known for talking about number 5, look for the helpers. Always look for the helpers. In any tragedy, talk about the helpers as much as you do the tragedy. Give it at least the equal portion in the conversation. This awful thing happened. Look at all those first responders. Look at those missions. Look at YFC coming and to participate in that. Talk about the helpers. When my daughter was going into grade 1, you know, when they go from, I don't know what it's like here, but I'm sure this story will feel similar either for your experience as a kid or as a parent or grandparent. She was in grade 1, and she went from the kindergarten yard, which felt safe and sound, to the big yard, because that's where the kids now, when they're grades 1 to 5, are now moved to the big yard. And she was terrified. And a lot of the grade 1s were like that. So in September, when recess came, they all just followed around the teacher that was on yard duty, right? Teacher goes over here, and a whole bunch of little grade 1 kids follow and stay close and just keep her in their sights and things like that, right? And my daughter was one of those kids. And then, you know, by the end of September, a lot of those kids have found safety or confidence in the yard. But there would be a small group of 2 or 3 that were still kind of always making sure they knew where the yard teacher was. Well, then by Thanksgiving, my daughter was the only one still following around that teacher. And I remember hearing about this and getting so kind of emotional and wound up, worried about my daughter that was like being afraid and couldn't free from the teacher. And the teacher had said, you know, when she goes into the yard, she's still afraid and has to stay close. And so I actually became so consumed with it that it wrecked my day. Many of you are like this too. We carry the burdens of our kids. I always say I'm as well as my kids are. If my kids are well, I actually can be okay. I can deal with my own fuss. But when my kids are not well, that's burdensome for me. So I mean, you got to imagine, this is like 20 years ago. I mean, I did the wrongest things for the rightest reasons. I'm sure many of you have done that before. I literally would go, I wanted to see for myself, and I would park down the road from the school, because I had more flexible hours. I know some of the 9 to 5 jobs you can't do that. I'd park down the road from the school, and I would walk to across the road from the school, and I would hide behind a tree and peer out and watch at recess to see if my daughter, and I was praying, dear God, just let her go off on her own for a little bit and play and be safe. And sure enough, she was just always looking for that teacher. Now, in retrospect, I look back and think, how on earth I didn't end up getting picked up by the police? You know, this guy going to you know, I usually was headed down to the streets to work with homeless kids, and I had long hair and ripped jeans, and here I was looking behind a tree at the kids in the playground. The fact that I lived through that must have been, you know, God's goodness to me. Eventually she got past that, but you know what? We had to figure out what that was. Do you know what it was? The previous year, bullying had been, just kid bullying, but bullying had been a problem in the school. So the principal took it upon himself to go to all the classes and talk to them about bullying and say, we don't want bullying, we've had a problem with this before, and they're just telling you don't bully. We didn't find out till like November that when we finally got through with Sarah Jane to find out what was going on, all of a sudden she said, well, I'm afraid of, the principal said, this was 2 months earlier, that there would be bullies, and so I just got afraid. My little girl back then came out of kindergarten. She didn't even know what a bully was, and she didn't know what a bully looked like. So she couldn't tell who was safe because, well, I don't know what a bully looks like. Can you imagine us as parents going, okay, we've never thought of this discussion. And so our young ones have such, we can't take for granted what's going on in their little worlds if we're not entered into the discussions. So I'm hoping you, inside your home and you here, do not have to hide down the street before you find out what's going on and the fears of your kids. Fear and anxiety, well, it comes from your brain. So I couldn't find a picture of a brain that was going to work for me, so I got out some big kids Mr. Sketch markers and drew my own brain. So your brain, you might remember I said it's the size of doing this. So this is, put your two fists together, that's your brain. Your brain weighs about 1.5 kilograms, 3.3 pounds. Is that right? Yes, that's right. I'm still an imperial system guy, so I always have to think about metric. That's your brain. And basically, the mammillary body, that's the main function, is your recollective memory, right here, this piece here. And then you get to your hippocampus, so it's a strange Latin word. This is where you process your long-term memories. For example, this is how tonight, if you're here, this is how you've left your home, and when you can remember now how to get back home, that's your hippocampus working. And one of the things it does, it encodes the emotional context for your amygdala. So it kind of informs, the hippocampus informs this part. And where all your fear and anxiety and upset are happening is right here. There's one on each side. It's called the amygdala. I'm not sure if you've heard of the amygdala before. The amygdala is where your emotions are given meaning. It's where remembered associations and responses, it's where you have what we call emotional memories. That's the part of your brain it comes from. And here's what you need to understand. When your amygdala does its job, I won't say too well, overdoes its job. That's a better way to put it. When it becomes what we call a supercharged amygdala, it cannot tell the difference between what is dangerous and what feels dangerous. And so, for example, you might walk to a yard, or the kids in your life, you might walk down a street and you get to an alley, and you look down an alley and you see that there's a dog down there. And instead of thinking, that dog might chase and bite me, a supercharged amygdala would tell you, that dog will chase me and bite me. You go right to what will happen, not would. It's a little bit like a smoke detector cannot tell the difference between toast burning and your house burning down. It's just set to go off. And so that's what your supercharged amygdala is like. Responds to possibilities as though they are certainties. And so this is the part of the brain we're trying to work with. This just helps you understand that that's what's going on in your head or the children in your lives' heads. So we talked about fear lists, and I don't know what age groups you represent here or in your home, but you'll find this interesting because there's a common thread in part of it. For 5 to 7-year-olds, here are some of the top fears generally. Fear of the dark, fear of bad guys, fear of fire. You might forget that fire is just a huge fear for 5 to 7-year-olds. Fear of doctors and needles. Many of us still have that fear today. Peer rejection. Already at age 5, peer rejection is a top fear. And then bugs and animals. So now we move to 8 to 11-year-olds. Bad guys and ghosts. Dying, sickness, school failure, being home alone. Of course, there was a movie about that. And then guess what else? Peer rejection. Once again. Teenagers, we go more with statistics, and this is from stageoflife.com. 75% of teenagers are afraid of poor academic performance. 66% are afraid of life after high school graduation. Imagine that. For my generation, we got excited about life after graduation. 66% are afraid of what that looks like. 56 afraid of lack of money. 54 afraid to talk with their teachers. If you are an educator watching there, if you're an educator in the room, the idea that 54% of our kids are afraid to talk to their teachers should make you crazy. And be an educator who says, that will not be me, because that is so unacceptable that over half of our kids are afraid to talk to half of their teachers. Or half our kids are afraid to talk to their teachers. And here we go. 44% are afraid of peer pressure. Now, 43% are afraid of depression and having the desire to commit suicide. 43%. But what was the common theme in there? What we found out by looking through this and going through it, from age 5 all the way until you graduate from high school, peer rejection. You're never not afraid of peer rejection. Now, many of us talk about peer pressure and peer rejection around high school all the time. Those of us that work with youth, we talk about it all the time. But it starts all the way back when you're 5 years old and you're in kindergarten. So we need to be mindful of that. Do you know what the number one fear of adults is? Any guesses? Number one fear of adults? At home you can be guessing and talk to whoever you're with. Some people would think, when I did this earlier this week, another session, one person said fear of public speaking. And we always hear about that. People are afraid of public speaking and dying and illnesses. They're always at the top of the list, right? Do you know what the number one fear of adults is? Loneliness. Number one fear of adults is loneliness. Now, that in general would have been an interesting statement for me to make. I want you to put that in perspective of 2020. When we are supposed to stay away from each other at all different points of time and different ways. When you consider the seniors in our lives who we are all so broken hearted. My folks are 85 and 81, who we get, and fortunately they're together and they're healthy, but when we see seniors on TV and stuff, we think of the loneliness. And before COVID even came, before 2020 and all the mystery and confusion even came, already we knew that loneliness was the number one fear. For those of us who are driven by compassion and want to look through the lens of compassion, we need to figure out what we're going to do about that. If there are more calls you need to make, more texts, more visits through the window, whatever it is, do not take this conversation lightly. Loneliness has the gravity for us, of us as adults. And if there's some name and face in your mind right now of someone you think that might be lonely, you need to vow tonight that within the next 24 hours you're going to do something about that. Make that commitment. So, how do we create safe ways to talk about fears? For those of you who have kids, you can do this for any age. It might seem like it's for small kids, but I'm telling you, you'd be surprised how older kids would use it as well. At first they might think it's silly, but once you're doing it with them, you're all doing it together. On our webpage, compassionseries.com/amisafe, we have all kinds of resources. And you can print off this. It's emoji cards. It'll come off as one page and you can cut it up. And you can see that there are emoji faces on there. And everything, sad, relieved, helpless, irritated, comfortable, happy, worried. It goes through all kinds of good, middle ground, and harsh feelings. And you cut them up, and what you can do is at supper, you make it something that you're all participating in. And perhaps you as mom or dad or grandpa and grandma, uncle, aunt or uncle, you'll go first. But you say, let's all find 3 cards that express how our day went. And you might say, well, this morning I was irritated because it was hard to get you guys at the door and I had stuff I was thinking about and this and that. And then by lunch I was contented because things were calmer and this and that. And now I feel happy because at least we're all sitting at supper together. For a lot of young people, at all ages, it's hard to get discussions started, or it's hard for them to express feelings But a simple emoji card, and our young people, they understand emojis. This is one way they're communicating now. And this is a lovely way to get it going. And again, you participate in it with them. So these kind of simple tools are really workable and really helpful. I always consider, am I safe? Once I did it with Iona. I don't take a lot of credit for it. I just pushed the buttons to say, we need a book like this. This was the book someone should have given me when I was a young parent. Because I had told you prior in the earlier lesson, sometimes my daughter in particular, when she would be angry, I just thought she was being bratty or disobedient or stuff. And then we dig far enough, and now I know, looking back, she was expressing some feelings of anxiety and just didn't know how to bring them out. So, what can we do to help? We talked about one. We said, don't play down your kids' emotions. Don't play them down. Don't make like they're no big deal. Don't try to talk them out of their feelings. How many of us have done that? You don't really feel scared. I mean, look at your brother's not scared, or we're not scared. We try to talk them out of those feelings, and it doesn't work. How many times you might look back and feel really sad and grievous about this, of times you remember that they actually just said, yeah, no, okay, I'm fine now. And you can think back and go, they weren't. They were actually now, I had turned this whole situation where they were trying to please me by agreeing to say they felt something they didn't feel, which is actually kind of sickening when you think of it as a parent. Don't make them feel ashamed. And be their release valve. If you can remember that word. How do I be a release valve in my young person's life, where if everything else is going on, when they're with me, they're so safe and so good, feeling so good, maybe not feeling so good, but feeling so at peace with me, that I'm the place they can express those things. That is just such a goal for us. Our bodies usually respond to fear and anxiety one of three ways. Now, some of us will overlap in this, but I want you to think about which one is you. I'm going to talk about these three. I'm sure you've heard these terms before, but think about yourself. The fight response. And we've talked a bit about it before with anger, but it could be any kind of emotion. The fight response might look like a disproportionate burst of anger or emotion. So some of us, when we get anxiety and stuff like that, we become emotional and out there. And you don't understand. I'm going to, or we just are bursting out, even if we don't explain it. The flight response might be someone who physically or emotionally just withdraws. And then the freeze response is someone who just can't communicate, becomes stiff, doesn't know what to do. Sometimes we would say they were the awkward person in the room, which is unfair, but you know that kind of language comes out. It's interesting for me as I consider it. I think when I was younger, I was the fight response, where I kind of was out there and emotional about it and got in front of it. And for whatever happened, and maybe if you're like me as you've gotten older, I've actually changed. I am now more of a withdrawal person. I'm more of a flight person now. I wonder when and how. I think it happened over a slow arc of time. Or now I'm just maybe that comes with, maybe there's some good in the bigger picture of that, where I'm going, I just don't need to get into that mess. I kind of walk away from it. There can be some good in some of those things. I mean, I think about when emails first came out, when I first started using email. I know a lot of you are so much younger you won't even imagine that. But for those of you who are, and someone would send you an email and you felt emotional or whatever about it, and you would answer back right away. How dare you say that and this and that and this and that. And now I'm like, okay, man. Anytime I'm bugged by an email, I'm giving it 24 hours before I push send. There's some wisdom in that, right? But I don't know if some of you have changed over time, but most of us are one of those three, and our young people are one of those three. And we have to recognize that and say, oh, that's actually a response to what they're feeling anxious about. Them not speaking is them not being rebellious or untrusting. That is actually their response to anxiety. And so we recognize those things. Here's one great thing you remember. If you don't remember anything else, remember this, and this is the one you'll want to apply to yourself. We used to use the word emotions for this, but I think a better word is feelings, because I don't want it to seem like it's a negative to have emotions. That's not true. But we know this. When feelings are high, thinking is low. When feelings are high, thinking is low. The best way for you to probably go quickly to understand when and where that is most of us will go to a place where we've had an argument with a spouse or a sibling or a friend, and we're like, when you walk away, you're just sure you're right, and the next day or even a couple hours later, you're going like, okay, I said all kinds of things that were ridiculous. Because our feelings were so high that our thinking was low, and we were just not thinking about the repercussions of this, or what I'm about to say, or how it would actually really hurt or cause damage to a relationship. So when our feelings are high, thinking is low, and it's no less, of course, when we're fearful or anxiety, or filled with anxiety. Our feelings get high, and we don't think. That's why we did those grounding exercises. Because it took us out of our head into this place where we were able to see that there's a whole world out there. And so we want to get our thinking. That's why we do the breathing exercises, to get the oxygen. And some of the other kind of things we can do around grounding are just really cool things we can do with our kids. Have you ever heard of a worry jar? Has anyone ever heard of a worry jar? Okay, you get a mason jar or a jar, and you put it at the side of the counter or somewhere that's handy, and you have scrap pieces of paper and a pencil or a pen there, and you just decide as a family you're going to try this for a month and see how it works. And you say, what we're going to do is, whenever any of us has a worry, we're going to write it on the scrap piece of paper, and we're going to put it in the jar. And there is something about assigning that worry and putting it somewhere. Now, sometimes I'm not suggesting they don't need to be dealt with immediately, but sometimes if it's an ongoing worry or anxiety, putting it in that jar and saying, okay, every Monday and every Thursday at supper, we're going to go through the worry jar, and we're going to discuss those things. And if it's something ongoing, like, I'm always nervous when the 9 o'clock school bell rings, maybe that's something for you. I know that was something for a lot of people in my generation. Well, let's sit down and actually have that discussion. And you assign a calm, wise, helpful time that you actually will discuss that as a family. And they get to hear family members discuss the same thing. It's not just them. And your worries will be in there as well. So they're going to get to hear mom or dad talk about their worries as well. And that idea that we're now in a relational conversation is a much safer and calmer way to talk about things. So we get to the fourth part of the book as we near the end, and that is from courage to compassion. And courage, of course, is the ability to do something that frightens you, and or strength in the face of pain or grief. What courage is not is the absence of fear, but the choice to move forward despite it. It's not the absence of fear. It's moving forward in spite of fear. And compassion, the reason my program is called the Compassion Series, it really goes back to the etymology of the word from 7th century Latin. I am old enough that I was in the last year in Ontario that they taught Latin in high school. I took grade 9 Latin. And so I actually remember this from all the way back then. The prefix, the front end, com, means together or with. That's what C-O-M means, together or with. And passion means to suffer or to endure. That's what passion actually means. And so when we put it together, compassion doesn't mean to feel something. We always think that that's what compassion. Compassion means to feel something and then to go and do something about it. Because the word compassion means to endure with. So if you were to fall off your chair, I could feel all kinds of things about how bad I feel about that. But if I was compassionate, me feeling bad about you falling off the chair would have me come and help you get up and see if you're okay. And we're trying to move people to a place where they don't just feel things, but where they enact things, because what they're feeling brings out the best of them and they want to make a difference. So we're trying to move from over to compassion. And one of the things we created was, and I don't think I have any here. I might in my vehicle for the people that are here. I can go look. But you can create a version of this at home, because the original compassion or courage kit was created at home. So we created this for my book launch events when I released this. And it's just a little package that's about 3 inches by 3 inches. This one has a zipper on it. But the original one was made by that little boy Eli and his mom. And they did it as a craft. I think they used some leather. And what it is a little pouch of some kind that you make or that you have. And then creatively you go around your home or wherever you are, and you decide that you're going to put 4 or 5 items in this courage kit. And what you're going to do, I'll tell you what those items might be in a second. What you're going to do is you're going to take this courage kit, and if you really feel like you're that kind of tactile person, you're going to carry it in your pocket all day long. And every time you feel anxious or nervous, you're reminded it's there. Or you might go into the hallway or the lunchroom or the bathroom, and you might need to open it up and look at the things that remind you that you can be brave. I'll give you an example of what might go in here. And the interesting thing is, adults make these too. I'll tell you what an adult told me they put in their courage kit. Eli, one of the things that a little boy Eli did when he made his courage kit, he got a little white stone and put it in his courage kit that he carried everywhere with him, in his backpack or in his pocket or something. And the little white stone was from a summer camp that he was really nervous to go to, but that he went to, and he survived the whole week at an overnight camp that he was afraid to go to. And whenever he looked at that stone, he was reminded that he was brave enough to go to an overnight camp. And it reminded him that he was brave. You can put things that cause you or your children to be compassionate in it. So some kids, they know other people who are like them. Yeah, they go like, I'm not the only anxious one. I know Tommy in my class is also anxious. They might write down some names of other kids that are anxious and put that in there. And it reminds them they're not alone when they look at those names. And for people of faith, you can actually encourage the young person in your life to actually take it out and pray for those kids. And that becomes another way to say they're thinking about other people that are in that place. You can put anything in there. You could put a picture of someone you know that always speaks goodness to you. Maybe that's you, mom or dad or grandma or grandpa, who always speaks goodness. And just seeing that picture reminds me I'm going to be okay. But you take this courage kit, you keep it small and flat and easy to carry. And for a lot of kids, even just having it in their backpack reminds them it's in there. And it becomes another way, another reminder. I had an adult who came up to me after a session, like a month after a session like this, and said, so I made myself a compassion kit, or a courage kit. And I said, oh, for the young person in your life, you went with them? He said, no, I made one for me. I carry it everywhere. And I said, well, what's in it? And the first thing he took out was a guitar pick. Said, when I was younger, I could go to the front of the church and play the guitar and help lead worship and music in my church like crazy. But something happened, and now I just don't feel I can, and I don't feel confident in myself and everything else. But I carry this to remind me and give me hope that maybe that reminds me of who I am as well. I am that person that did that. So there are exercises we can use like that for all of us. There are things we can do as parents. You know, one of the things that I did, the rightest thing I think I did in my life was my dad taught me really to be a deep prayer, just to commit to really praying. And I know for some of you watching this now, you're not, I did make no assumption you're a person of the Christian faith or any faith, but this is my story, and so if it in some way blesses you or prompts you to think more about that, then that's good. When I used to, every day, every Labor Day, I hated Labor Day. I hated it when I was a kid, hated it when I was an adult. This is the only Labor Day I was sad because I was wishing all those poor kids could go back to school, but generally I hated Labor Day. And right from when my daughter was in kindergarten, I thought, I'm so terrified of her going to kindergarten. Starting a school, all of a sudden we were releasing, you know how it is, you were releasing your kid into the world and going like, wait, they were mine for 5 whole years. Now I'm supposed to trust the world for like 6 hours with my child. And so on Labor Day Monday at nighttime, I would take my kids one at a time to their school, and we would just walk around the outside of the school and talk about what it was going to be like tomorrow, and what the teacher might be like, and the kids like, and what they might do, and let them express the exciting parts and the anxious parts, everything else. And then I would just pray for them and pray with them. And do you know that I did that with both my kids all the way from kindergarten until they graduated university? Can you imagine my teenage son letting me go to his high school with him the night before school started and pray with him? Like, you know, at a certain point that doesn't become cool, but there's something that in my relationship with my kids that allowed that. And I will say, once my kids got to grade 3 or 4, I drive a motorcycle, and so I would take turns, we'd go on the motorcycle, and somehow that made it a little bit cooler for them. So that was a help. But you know, to this day, with my kids, it's not necessarily that I'm praying for them, but I know my kids, even as young adults, when they're facing things, the sound of my voice when I pray somehow calms my kids, even as adults. Because there was something in the spirit of that all the way through. And there was something for me as dad knowing that I was praying for them. So with my daughter going into junior high, she was really nervous about junior high because she had heard how scary it was. It was next level, and there was older kids, and she was small and blonde, and there was such a diverse group in the school, and somehow she was anxious about that. And so we went there to pray that in the schoolyard. In the junior high schoolyard. We did what we do. I took her first, took my son later. We went on my motorcycle. We got there. We just said, let's walk around the entire new schoolyard because that was brand new and foreign to her. So we went in, and so the next morning she wouldn't have to be in a new schoolyard and have never been in it. And we just walked around the outside. She happened to go to the same junior high that I went to, so I could talk about what it was like when I went there a billion years ago. And we walked through and everything like that, and she was still anxious, and we prayed and everything. And I said, you need to be reminded tomorrow that what it feels like here with Daddy right now. And so you just get creative. And so, you know, we saw an acorn that had fallen off a tree that came off the boulevard. And I picked up the acorn. I say, see this acorn, Sarah Jane? I hadn't thought of the courage kits by that point. This is a long while ago. I said, I'm going to put it right here by this fence. It's right where the enter. And tomorrow when you walk through this opening, I want you to look down for that acorn. And you just remember this is where you stood and prayed with your dad. And we're reminded that God's got you. And Daddy and Mommy are thinking about you all day. And we are your safe place that you're going to come to. And my sweet daughter, for that next week, we don't know where that acorn went or when that story drifted off. But there was something about that little reminder that there was that school wasn't part of her life that Mom and Dad were a billion miles away from. So all that to say, those are my stories. I only tell those. I mean, I got so many things wrong that it's nice to once in a while tell you something I got right. But those are my prompts to you to be really creative in the emotional lives of your kids, and be visual as you can. If your kids are sighted kids, be visual. If they're hearing kids, let them hear your voice pray and talk a certain way that becomes familiar with them over a lifetime. Empathy is the beginning of compassion. One of the ways we talked about how do we get our kids to be compassionate with each other as siblings is we introduce dialogues that maybe don't have to do with the things we're talking about at that point, but that remind them there are exercises you can do. So suppose you have a really popular kid, one of your children is popular and has lots of friends and everything, but you still want them to be an empathetic kid. You want them to look through the world through the lens of compassion. You still walk them through these exercises that are vital. For example, in a discussion, they've never not been invited to a birthday party because they're the popular kid. But you just start these discussions and say, what do you think it would feel like if one of your best friends had a birthday party and you didn't get invited? Or all your friends got invited to one of the kids' parties, all the people you hang out with, and you weren't invited. And just enter into that discussion where you're talking about and they're talking about. And all of a sudden, you're opening up this door of empathetic discussion. Even though it's not their reality, they're thinking, yeah, that would really stink. You know, if my friend Darren, I think he went through something like that. Yeah, that would be awful. The empathy comes, and it's the start to compassion. You might say, well, what do you think, like, how many of you adults in the room got yelled at in school? Ever, right? Remember how embarrassing or humiliating or scary it was? You enter in that conversation. What's it feel like when you're yelled at in school? And you talk about that discussion, or if you were. And they become empathetic. So then when it does happen to a kid in class, they're already there and they're thinking, yeah, I remember this discussion at home. Boy, I need to be good to that kid, as opposed to going, glad it's not me, which is predominantly what I would have done at that age. If they're really little, you can take the discussion to a different place. You're still trying to grow this empathy, and which makes us stronger, more courageous, even at a young age. It might be like, what would it feel like to lose your favorite toy? So even if you're dealing with a 4 and 5-year-old, you have that sweet little discussion about what it's like to lose your favorite toy. So we're trying to grow empathy. The reason I come down to this here at the end is this. We talked about the brain, that we had stats, we had all kinds of stuff. This is all important stuff to learn and know. But truly, nothing will replace tenderness and gentleness. I'm not saying doing this instead of that. I'm not saying that instead of this. But I am telling you, to have all the knowledge on this topic and not enter it in a tender way is a miss. Because some of us, what we need most to listen, to hear, to feel clarity, we need tenderness. What do you think the greatest counterculture in the world right now is? What are we missing most? We are missing goodness and gentleness. I am telling you. If this world needs something right now, it is for a people to rise up and to be filled with goodness and to be gentle in how they express things. And we want to raise children that are about goodness and they're about gentleness. That is the true counterculture right now. Who would have thought? Back when, our young people, when I talk to young people directly, like teenagers, I'll say, like in the 50s, kids were known for being rebellious, and in the 60s they were known for this, in the 70s they were known for this, because that was the counterculture, and rock and roll was all about the counterculture and all about those things. But now if you want to be really counterculture, if you are a teenager in 2020 and you really want to be the counterculture, different than the rest of the world person, you know what you do? You decide, I will be filled with gentleness. That will be the counterculture. That's your rock and roll, is to be a gentle person. Because we need that. And so enter in with tenderness. And for parents here, when I first did this seminar 3 years ago, I did all this discussing, and I told a few more stories about myself and mistakes I made. And I found out things, and I could see people lighting up going, wow, I never thought about my child's anger being part of their anxiety. All kinds of things like that they might have heard along the way. And we did a discussion time, and parents started to get up and started to cry, and almost became like a confessional. And what they were saying is like, I didn't realize I'd been doing it so wrong. I didn't know that I probably was actually hurting my kids in some way by the way I was doing this, or taking them back a step instead of forward a step. So anyway, I say this to you in the room, I say to you this at home. Please, now that you know, forgive yourself. Forgive yourself and just decide, I will move forward. I will be a gentle parent. I will be a tender parent. I will change. I will learn from that. But I'm telling you, if you do not carry that heartache, unless there's something you need to ask for forgiveness for, of course, but I mean, move forward. You now need to move forward and not get stuck there. And so I think those are, I will say this, and then I think Johanna's going to come forward with the mic, is one of the things you'll find on that site, I think I had a, here, hang on, sorry, you should never leave camera, but this might help. CompassionSeries.com/amisafe. Everything's free, so I'm not selling anything. You can order the books, but there's a digital copy there free. But the reason I show this is, do you know who Steve Bell is? Do some of you know who Steve Bell is? Steve Bell's won multiple Juno Awards, and he's one of Canada's real treasures. He's a Christian singer-songwriter, but also multiple awards. And he's got 20 albums out. He's toured with many symphonies as well. He's kind of a James Taylor type of artist. And I commissioned Steve to write a family lullaby. And you will find it at this site. And there's a free download of it, so you can put it right on your phone. Or there's a studio version of it, him in studio actually performing it. And basically, I want you to know that that's the companion piece to the book, is that a lot of families are using music as something to gather around. And this song is called A Heartbeat Away, and it's beautiful. And what a lot of families are doing now is when their kids are going through anxious times, or they as a parent are going through anxious time, they will gather around, and some families are not accustomed to doing kind of emotional conversations. A lot of families wouldn't pray together, or they're not prayers, and I respect that, you know, that's their family. But they're able to listen to music together. Something about that feels safe, and they haven't had to stretch too far. This is a beautiful family lullaby, good for any age, your youngest kid, your teenager, and listen to these lyrics, and they're filled with tenderness, but they're filled with courage and enthusiasm and excitement. So look for the song for Steve Bell at this website as well with the other things. I didn't want to leave that out because I think that's a real resource that could be great for lots of you. Okay? Johanna, I think you wanted to come and lead us a bit.
Yeah, so we just wanted to open up the floor. We have people online still watching that we're watching through the whole thing, which is really encouraging. And we just wanted to invite anyone in the room that would like to ask questions. If you think of anything, I'm just going to start out with an online question for you, Tim, and then we can move to anyone online, and I'll just hold the mic for you, and then I'll bring it back. I'll put my mask on when I'm in the room with you guys. The first question is, what about helping our kids to be more resilient?
Yes, resiliency. Okay. I think, now I just got to find the book I had, because I actually had a piece on resiliency that I could have read. Let me find it here. F, that's right. You see, this is why I have a teaching book. Resiliency. Increasing a child's repertoire of healthy coping skills builds resilience. Resilience is the ability to withstand and bounce back from the difficulties of life rather than being pulled under by them. The goal of resiliency is not to remove children from hard situations or to eliminate uncomfortable feelings, but rather to give them what they need to manage the situation without becoming consumed by it. Equipping children with tools to manage their anxiety empowers them and communicates that we believe they are strong enough to walk through the difficult times. As a byproduct of increased resiliency, anxiety will begin to diminish over time. So we kind of come alongside them, and we're not trying to eliminate those feelings, but we're trying to give them tools they can to walk through them. A little bit of my daughter's resiliency was the discussions with her dad and the signs of it, the acorn on the ground or the sound of my voice in prayer. And these were to remind her that she is a resilient spirit. It's to remind all of us that we are we have resiliency in us, which means we are not, our lot in life is not this fearful, anxious moment that we're in, but that we're reminded that we actually have what it means to step forward. We had a young one share today about what it meant to be anxious and not want to step forward, but to be resilient enough to say, maybe I can do this, and maybe I can move forward. So we always are trying to encourage the idea of resiliency, not people, it's easy to categorize people and say, oh, so you're just an anxious person. That's just who you are. We stick that on people all the time. We stick it on ourselves. Hey, I'm just an anxious person. And there's not a lot of room for resiliency when we categorize ourselves in that stuck place.
Cool. No questions online yet, but Byron Bradley says hello from Mustard Seed in Alberta.
Oh, well, that's nice. Nice to communications from somewhere.
Does anyone in the room have any questions that you wanted to ask? I'll come back here to you, Judy. Here, I'll hold it. Sorry.
I'm a counselor, and what I see, if parents don't deal with their own fears, they'll instill them in their children. Don't try that, you might get hurt. Don't try that, you might get hurt. And over time, they're not going to try anything because they'll get hurt. You brainwash them.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's part of when I said at the end there that a lot of parents start to feel regret and sadness is because they realize they have actually that they have kind of unloaded their anxieties on their kids or the people around them. So that is a great comment for sure. Thank you. Any other? It doesn't have to be a question, it can be a comment for sure. That's really helpful.
Here, Trina.
I think I just wanted to kind of add to that as well, that a lot of, you want me to hold it? Okay. I'll add to that as well. I mean, this is very daunting, within families, the level of resiliency is often passed from generation to generation. So they often say that we're born with a level of resilience we have, and it's the coping skills that are taught to us after that continue to kind of bring us through life. I just want to say that.
No, it's good.
Yeah,
Generational,
thank you.
right?
That's a helpful comment. Yeah. I didn't mean to skip over the resilience part of our conversation. I think it got below my piece there, but that is vital stuff, resilience and passing it along. And even demonstrate, this is where sharing our story helps. My mom, when I was a little boy, had a nervous breakdown. Now, I'm not telling tales out of school. When I was writing it, I wrote a book called Dancing with Dynamite, and the byline is Celebrating Against the Odds, and it's about coming past these hard stories. And I wanted inside this bigger story to put this one little paragraph about my mom, and when I was 8 years old, when she had her nervous breakdown. And so I wrote this letter, because my mom has been, I don't think she'd call it healed of that, but she's come so far that's past, and she came past that, and so I wanted to, before I could put it in the book, I was working in California and I wanted to keep it in my manuscript, and so I called my mom and I said, Mom, can I read this paragraph to you, because I don't want this to go in without you feeling like you're comfortable with me sharing a little bit about when you went through this. And my mom her answer was, Tim, you don't even have to read to me. I trust you, and if any part of my story can help someone else, then I want that to happen. So part of her resiliency was in the sharing. Now, the B part of that story is the shock of me, and you as a counselor, any of you who are counselors would have a heyday with what I'm about to tell you. So I just thought, okay, that's great, Mom, thanks so much. And I thought I would just read her that paragraph. It's like 5 sentences in my book. I read the first sentence over the phone. I mean, I'm in my 40s at this point. It's not like I was young. And I just broke down and started crying. I couldn't read the other 4 sentences because somehow it was so emotional for me to read to my mom how I look back at that season in my childhood. And I guess I had never said it to my mom. I didn't feel like it was inside of me waiting to get out. Like it wasn't something hidden and now this is my moment. In fact, I just launched into it like I'm just going to read it to her and get her okay and keep moving on. But there was something inside of me that I wasn't even aware that was triggered, and saying it to my mom over the phone. And it was actually me and my mom have lots of sweet moments together, but it was a really sweet moment. I'm sharing that because when you express to your loved ones some of what you're going through, there's renewal and resiliency just in the tenderness of the conversation. And we can be surprised by the goodness that comes when we are in good dialogue, healthy dialogue with each other.
That's great. Super good. I've got another question here. What adjustments do parents make with their child's first response to anxiety, when their child's first response to anxiety is anger instead of another emotional response? So instead of getting angry, or instead of being fearful or anxious,
Yeah.
they go straight to anger.
And the question is, what do you do about it? Or
As a parent, what can you do about that?
Yeah, I like I said, I feel like I blew it, so the advice I'd give you now is me thinking what would be best to do as opposed to otherwise. So my daughter, she would burst out about something, and it seemed like something we should address because it seemed like a rotten thing to say or to do, or what she was actually expressing. And then the really tricky part was, after 45 minutes, we'd find out, well, I'm really worried about this. But we had to go through, we could be like, say, you need to clean your room. You really do. We've asked you 5 times. You're not doing it. And at least pick up your stuff, whatever else. And getting this big, long argument. And the anger was, like I said, we didn't recognize it was way over the top for what the discussion was. It was like supercharged anger for us to ask to clean a room. And so for us, it's reading this. It's a little bit about really knowing your kids and being aware of where this is, because sometimes our kids are angry or let out just because they're actually being a bit saucy or whatever word you might use. But if you're aware that that could be, and if you look for the cues, I don't know what you do the first time, but if you look for cues and you find out, wow, this is a repeated behavior, all of a sudden my child is overly angry or overly emotional that doesn't seem proportionate with the situation, then now we're tuned in to say, okay, maybe I need to look for ways to not get unraveled here in this argument, but to get closer and say, are you doing okay? Or finding other parts of the discussion or getting conversations about other parts of the day. That's where I had a hard time. Was I always thought it was enabling. I always thought, like, if I just say, oh, it's okay, poor you, that I was enabling them to just get away with
Well,
things.
and certain personalities tend to go to anger first because it's too hard to be vulnerable, right?
Yeah, and in this day and age, trust me, like, we're seeing anger's every TV show, every movie, every newscast. Like, anger's just okay. Like, I mean, for so many young people. This is kind of why I ended with the tenderness and gentleness part, was like, we need to get back to that place where the anger is not just an everyday occurrence and we can't even read it, what it's about.
Oh, that's really good.
I don't know if I had a good answer for there, but I told you what I feel.
Another one is how do we help our children when we don't always know the conversations they are exposed to? For example, the bully talk your daughter encountered.
Yeah. So this is where, I mean, most families do this. When it comes to the school part, this is where we do need to engage with the teachers. I think a lot of times our engagement with teacher is we predominantly think it's about academics. How's my kid doing in this subject? How my kids do this subject? But I always told my kids this, when I get your report card, we care about the grade section. But I'm actually way more interested in the comments section. We can work on the grade section, but when they say, your kid's always talking out, or your child seems withdrawn, or this or that. That seems to be a vital part of the conversation, is who are our kids, and how are we raising their hearts to be and their expressions. The question was, in fullness, that
How do we help our children when they don't always know the conversations they are exposed to
yeah,
at
so
school?
so we talked to, so that's me going, I would go back to the teachers, not just on Parents' Night, but in general, not say, well, why is my kid getting 52 in math? We want to deal with that, but what does this comment actually mean, or what are you noticing? And take that as important as other. And quite often we found that usually the marks would go up when the comments would change too. Like there was, there was a lot of
It's
line
been
to it.
interesting because both my children are online, and I've found that my one child, who's an extrovert, I think 90% of her school experience is probably social. Do you know what I mean? And then the rest is learning. And so it's so interesting because she's going back to school this coming week, but I've been finding that her desperate need for teacher interaction and social interaction is so much higher than the grades, right? It's so much, because it's part of their development.
Well, when we talked about being a release valve, the idea was that they would inherently know if we can create that. I know that's easy to say, and if you have teenagers, this is even harder, but this is where you want to get, where, as best you can, that if they're feeling some frustration at school, whether it's fear, anxiety, or otherwise, that home is a place they can actually talk about that. I know that's, for some people, that's a tragedy. They go like, I've done everything right. My teenager's just working against me. I'm not sure there's much you can do to force your kid, well, I'm guessing there's nothing you can do to force your kid to talk to you. But if you keep playing your role the way you should play it, which is like, maybe you don't want to talk, like my son would be less expressive than my daughter. We always said to my daughter, you don't have to tell us everything you're thinking. And then we'd say to my son, you need to tell us something you're thinking. And then we would joke and say, okay, in the middle is probably somewhere the happy medium. But to have young people, I know this from the kids I worked with who have, 9 out of 10 homeless kids in Toronto went to the street because they were abused, physically, sexually, emotionally abused. It's only 1 out of 10 that actually was fleeing because they were trying to teach mom and dad a lesson, or they were being brats or weekend warriors. It didn't matter. The street gobbled them up, so we need to move them all off as quickly as we can. But those young people, they had broken trust. That's why they ended up on the street, all the kids I work with. So to just keep saying, I will create a place of trust, that when my child is willing and wants to walk through that door, they know it's here. They know it's here. They know it's here. I can't force them to walk through the door, but I can make sure that door is always wide open, this place of trust.
We're going to take one more question from online, and if there's one more last question in the audience, we'll take that as well, because we're just about over time. As a parent, I can be obsessed with keeping my toddler safe. Do you have some tips for keeping a balance between safety and allowing him to have some freedoms to have fun and grow and learn?
Toddler. Yeah, I'm just heading back into the toddler as the grandpa part, but already I see myself going, oh my gosh, little Jackson's going to be out there. I'm not sure what kind of freedoms they're looking for at toddlership, so I'm not sure. Yeah, not eating worms. I don't know. I kind of have a more of a sense of that when they get to school and letting them go, but all I can say to that, unless someone else has a comment that might help if you have toddlers, is your love for your child, never beat yourself up for feeling that. It's about figuring out what to do with it.
No, that's good.
Yeah, my take is always, I'm going to teach them a skill so that I know they can do it safely, right? Like when they're learning how to climb downstairs. Okay, well, I do it with them, right? Just like we walk through them with emotions too, right? Like I'm going to sit beside you as we deal with this emotion. I'm going to be with you as we learn how to navigate these stairs. And then I feel comfortable, in you operating them by yourself, right? And then they have the confidence to do it. So that's my...
Yeah, that's great. That's really,
excellent.
really good. Really, really good. Is there anyone else in the audience that has one more question or... No? So I'm just going to say, on behalf of Centennial Road Church, thank you so much for being here. This has been an amazing, I love listening. I love your stories, and it's been good. And thank you for each one of you guys for coming out and for everybody that's watched. We have some community sponsors. I'd love to be able to flash them up on the screen just at the very end again. You'll see this entire setup was free because we have community investors that invest in the youth of our community. And so I just want to thank those guys for doing that. Thank you so much, Tim. And I hope you have
Thank you. Bless you. Bless you.
God bless. Thanks.
Thank you.